Today we're going deep on the story of a king from the 8th century BCE. I'm talking about a man who built an absolute empire, whose fame spread far and wide, but whose reign ended not in some glorious battle, but in total isolation and tragedy. This is the incredible story of King Uzziah of Judah.
So, this warning, etched onto a stone tablet that was found back in 1931, is where we're going to start. Talk about a message from the past, right? It's a burial plaque, made centuries after he died, but it shows you just how seriously people still took his memory. And it really makes you wonder.
I mean, what does a king have to do to be remembered so vividly that hundreds of years later, people are moving his remains and carving a warning like that? That's the story we're going to unpack right now. But, before we get into the whole epic rise and tragic fall, we have to establish the facts, because this isn't just some legend or a myth. Uzziah was a real historical person, and we know that because the proof is literally etched in stone.
And what's so cool is how all these different lines of evidence just click together. We've actually found seal impressions from his top officials, which proves he had a real, functioning government. Of course, we have that burial tablet we just saw. But get this, there's even geological data pointing to a massive earthquake right around 760 BCE, an event that prophets at the time actually wrote about. And on top of all that, archaeologists have dug up fortifications and water systems that perfectly match the descriptions of his building projects. So yeah, the man was real and he was very busy.
And busy might be the understatement of the century. Uzziah's time on the throne wasn't just long. It was a straight-up golden age for the kingdom of Judah. We're talking peak power and prosperity.
52 years. Just let that sink in for a second. In an age of constant warfare and chaos, this one king provided over half a century of stable leadership. He took the throne when he was only 16 and managed to build this incredible period of security and wealth, an empire that he would eventually hand off to his son, Jotham, in one of the most bizarre ways you can imagine.
And he was a beast on the battlefield. He didn't just play defense, he went on offense. He took the fight to the Philistines, Judah's longtime rivals, and literally tore down the walls of their major cities. He brought surrounding tribes under his control and even made the Ammonites pay him tribute, which was a huge sign of his dominance in the region.
But here's the thing, Uzziah wasn't just a warrior. He was a master builder, a visionary. He massively upgraded Jerusalem's defenses, built strategic outposts way out in the desert, and dug these enormous cisterns for water, which was crucial for both his army and for farming. The historical accounts actually say he loved the soil. You can just picture him overseeing this thriving kingdom full of farms and vineyards. He was building a nation, piece by piece.
But as the story often goes, with all that strength and all that success came a fatal flaw. The biblical story marks this dramatic turning point where the king's greatest strength became the very source of his own destruction. His power led to a dangerous, unchecked pride.
So at the absolute height of his power, feeling like he was untouchable, Uzziah makes this catastrophic mistake. He decides he's going to perform a sacred ritual that was only for the priests. He walks into the holy temple to burn incense himself. This was a massive overreach of his power. And get this, a group of 80 priests actually had the courage to stand up to him and tell him to stop. But as he's raging at them, furious at being challenged, the story says it happened. Leprosy suddenly erupted on his forehead, right there in the temple.
And the fallout from that moment? It was immediate, and it was absolute. The most powerful man in the kingdom, this celebrated builder and conqueror, became an outcast overnight.
The irony is just staggering, isn't it? The very king who felt he was worthy enough to barge into the holiest part of the temple was now forbidden from even setting foot on the temple grounds, forever. Because his condition was seen as ritually unclean, he had to live out the rest of his days in a separate house, totally cut off from his court, his people, and his public life. This whole disaster created a huge power vacuum, and this is where his son Jotham is really thrust into the spotlight. Uzziah was still technically the king, but he was a king in exile inside his own kingdom, so Jotham had to step up and take control. He became the co-regent, the one actually governing the land and running the palace. Just think about that. He had to run the very empire his father built while his father was still alive but completely out of sight. Uzziah had just vanished. But even in disgrace, Uzziah's reign had been so massive, so foundational, that it became this critical benchmark in history, a reference point for some of the most important events of that entire era.
This timeline really puts it all into perspective. Uzziah's long rule was the backdrop for these major league prophets like Amos, Hosea, and Isaiah. And remember that huge earthquake we found the geological evidence for? Well, the prophets marked time by it, saying it happened in the days of Uzziah. His reign was literally the stage where this massive chapter of history played out.
And there is no greater proof of his impact than this one line. The famous world-changing vision of the prophet Isaiah, the one where he sees the throne of God, is dated by this single event, in the year that King Uzziah died. The death of this mighty and ultimately tragic earthly king is the exact moment that marked Isaiah's vision of the true heavenly king. It was truly the end of an era.
So in the end, we're left with this legacy split right in two. On one hand, the brilliant nation builder who created a golden age, and on the other, a cautionary tale of a man whose pride cost him absolutely everything. It really makes you think about a timeless question of power. No matter how much you build, how much does your own personal character end up defining the legacy you leave behind?